Emma shifted in her seat, the hum of the commercial airliner vibrating faintly through the plastic and fabric beneath her. Seat 18A was her window to a world she had long dreamed of. Skies stretching endlessly, clouds folding like mountains of cotton, and the sun scattering golden streaks across the horizon. She had spent countless hours imagining herself as a pilot, soaring above the earth in sleek jets, performing daring maneuvers that defied gravity. Her notebook rested on her lap, a well-worn companion, its pages crowded with sketches of fighter jets, meticulously labeled diagrams, and imagined flight paths. Her fingers traced the outline of an F-22 Raptor she had drawn the night before, adding a small detail to the tail fin. She whispered to herself, "Perfect, just like in the movies." Emma's voice was barely audible, a soft murmur swallowed by the steady roar of the plane's engines. Around her, the cabin was alive with ordinary sounds, parents shushing restless, children, flight attendants moving briskly down the aisle with trays of drinks, the soft click of seatbelts being fastened and unfastened, and the occasional announcement from the cockpit. Emma's mother sat beside her, scrolling through her phone, oblivious to the intricate world of imagination unfolding in her daughter's mind. Her father had slipped into a corner seat near the aisle, reading a novel he had promised to finish. On this flight, for the family, it was just another trip, another layover, another airport terminal with its mix of hurried travelers and the faint scent of reheated coffee. For Emma, however, it was the start of something extraordinary she could not yet name. She pressed her forehead lightly against the cool window and stared at the sky. Even at 30,000 feet, the clouds seemed tangible, almost close enough to touch. Her imagination began to fill in the gaps. Below her, she envisioned a vast patchwork of cities and forests, rivers snaking like silver ribbons, and mountains rising like jagged teeth. She imagined herself swooping low over the landscape, engines roaring, wind buffeting the plane, the thrill of speed vibrating through her bones. In her mind, the plane she was riding in was no ordinary airliner, it was a Raptor. And she was the pilot. Her notebook lay open across her knees, a field of sketches and notes about aerodynamics, cockpit controls, and imaginary dogfights. She had labeled every button, every switch, and every lever she imagined existed in a fighter jet cockpit. Her mind ran wild with possibilities, evasive maneuvers, barrel rolls, loops, and the dizzying adrenaline of chasing the horizon. She even gave herself a call sign in her mental flight logs. Falcon. The name felt perfect, swift, sharp, fearless. She whispered it quietly, letting it roll off her tongue, imagining it being picked up over a radio channel by another pilot somewhere in the world. As she doodled, she felt the slight vibration of the cabin beneath her feet, reminding her that she was still bound to an ordinary commercial flight, not a fighter jet slicing through the stratosphere. Yet, even in this ordinary setting, she could feel the thrill of adventure coursing through her veins. The plane's engine noise became a soundtrack, a low hum that blended with her heartbeat, grounding her imagination in reality, while also allowing it to soar. Emma glanced around the cabin, observing the people around her. Some were napping, heads tilted against the window or leaning against their companions. Others were absorbed in screens, watching movies, or scrolling through social media feeds. The ordinary routine of travelers continued all around her. A man adjusting the strap of his backpack, a flight attendant assisting a passenger with a small child, a teenager tapping impatiently at a tablet. Emma, though, remained lost in her world of jets and clouds, feeling both small and immense at the same time, a child in a massive aircraft, yet a commander of the skies in her imagination. A small commotion near the front of the cabin caught her attention. She noticed the pilots moving in and out of the cockpit, their uniforms crisp, their badges gleaming. She didn't understand most of the airline codes, but she knew enough to recognize the insignias as something special, something important. She tilted her head, curious, tracing the golden stripes on their epaulets, the intricate emblem on their jackets, the gleam of their headset microphones. She whispered under her breath, "They're like real-life heroes," though she didn't expect anyone to hear her. Her mother nudged her gently. "Emma, honey, do you want a snack?" she asked, glancing down from her phone. Emma shook her head politely, but kept her eyes glued to the cockpit door. Her mother's voice was a tether, a reminder of the ordinary world, yet it could not pull her fully away from the extraordinary one she had created in her mind. She returned to her notebook, sketching a new plane she had imagined overnight, a hybrid between an F-22 and a sleek, futuristic design of her own invention. Suddenly, she noticed a detail she hadn't before. A small silver insignia near the cockpit door, catching the cabin light just so. It was subtle, almost hidden, but Emma's eyes were drawn to it like a magnet. She leaned closer, squinting at the tiny engraving. Her curiosity piqued. She whispered softly, "Falcon," this time pointing subtly at the insignia, connecting it in her mind with the call sign she had chosen for herself. The word felt alive, resonating with the hum of the plane, the whisper of the air, and the rhythm of her heartbeat. Across the cabin, a few passengers glanced her way, smiling at the child's fascination. A flight attendant, noticing Emma's intensity, smiled knowingly and continued down the aisle, her steps silent but deliberate. Emma did not notice the glances or the smiles. She was immersed entirely in the world of her own creation, a world where she was no longer just a child on a plane, but a pilot navigating the skies with precision, courage, and skill. The engines shifted slightly as the plane leveled at cruising altitude, creating a gentle vibration through the cabin. Emma pressed her hand against the window again, feeling the faint shiver of air pressure. She imagined it as turbulence encountered in her fighter jet, each bump a challenge, each sound a test of skill. In her mind, she adjusted imaginary controls, stabilizing the plane with practiced ease. She scribbled notes furiously, diagrams of maneuvers, and strategies for hypothetical missions. Her father peeked over his book, noticing her intense focus. "You're really into this, aren't you?" he asked, half amused, half impressed. Emma nodded earnestly, not taking her eyes off her notebook. "I'm practicing for when I fly real jets someday," she said. Her voice carried conviction, a mixture of innocence and determination. Little did anyone realize that today her fascination and a single whispered word, Falcon, would connect her imagination to something far bigger than her family, far bigger than the cabin of a plane. Outside, the clouds drifted lazily, the sun glinting off the tips of distant contrails. Emma's mind soared higher than the aircraft itself. She sketched rapidly, her pencil flying across the pages, detailing imaginary scenarios where she navigated. Through enemy skies, outsmarting rival pilots, and performing daring aerial feats. Each sketch was more ambitious than the last, and each whispered word Falcon felt like a key to unlocking new adventures. Unbeknownst to Emma, above the clouds, eyes trained in reality were scanning the skies. 2 F-22 pilots, miles above. The commercial flight were engaged in a routine training exercise. Their instruments picked up signals that most civilians could never see. In the structured, disciplined world of military aviation, Falcon was not just a word, it was a code name with weight, significance, and consequence. The coincidence of Emma's whispered name was about to set off a chain of events that would transform an ordinary flight into an extraordinary story. Emma leaned back, smiling faintly to herself, oblivious to the fact that she had already begun to bridge two worlds, the innocent imagination of a child and the calculated precision of trained pilots. Her notebook was a portal, her sketches a map, and her whispered Falcon a key that would unlock adventures she could never have anticipated. The ordinary flight, the routine hum of engines, and the casual chatter of passengers were about to give way to something far greater. For Emma, Seat 18A was no longer just a seat. It was the starting point of an adventure that would reach far beyond the clouds. Emma's fingers traced the outline of her latest sketch, her pencil moving rapidly as her imagination soared. The word Falcon lingered in her mind, a whisper that felt alive. She didn't notice the subtle shift in the cabin's atmosphere, nor the way a few passengers glanced toward the cockpit with quiet curiosity. She was entirely absorbed in the world she had created, a world of aerial maneuvers, daring escapes, and jets that danced through the clouds as though the sky itself had no limits. Her notebook was filled with intricate details, schematics of imagined weapon systems, flight patterns, and tactical formations. Every line she drew was infused with a sense of possibility, a child's determination to master the skies before she had even left the ground. The hum of the engines beneath her feet was steady, almost hypnotic, and Emma leaned against the window, feeling the faint vibration as a thrill rather than a nuisance. Her imagination was unstoppable, and in her mind, she was no longer seated in 18A, but commanding the cockpit of her Raptor, her call sign Falcon echoing across the sky. She whispered it softly again, unaware that the world she imagined and the world above the clouds were about to intersect in ways she could never have anticipated. Far above, at more than 30,000 feet, two F-22 pilots were deep into a scheduled training exercise. Lieutenant Colonel James Carter and Captain Maria Alvarez had been flying together for years, their coordination honed through countless hours of drills, simulations, and real missions. They were scanning the skies, monitoring signals, and maintaining strict radio discipline, as all pilots in top-secret exercises were trained to do. A flicker of a signal appeared on their screens, faint, almost imperceptible. Carter squinted at the monitor, his seasoned eyes detecting a pattern that seemed out of place. "What's that?" he muttered, his voice tight with curiosity. Alvarez leaned over, adjusting the scope. The signal was unusual, a commercial aircraft transmitting, a subtle low-frequency code that matched none of the standard airliner protocols. And then came the word that made both pilots freeze. "Falcon." "Falcon?" Alvarez repeated, incredulous. "You don't hear that on civilian channels." Carter's brow furrowed. "No, you don't. It's a code name in the exercise." "Why would a commercial flight be transmitting that?" In the cockpit below them, Emma leaned over her notebook, unconsciously syncing her whispered call sign with the mysterious energy above. She had no idea that her casual fascination had caught the attention of some of the most skilled pilots in the nation. Her innocent word had triggered a link in the military's communication network, a rare and improbable coincidence that could have had serious consequences if misinterpreted. Back in the cabin, Emma's mother glanced at her daughter, noticing the intensity with which Emma drew her planes. "Emma, are you imagining another story?" she asked gently. Emma looked up. Briefly, a glint of excitement in her eyes. "Yes, and it's amazing. My Falcon is doing a barrel roll right now over a mountain range," she said with a laugh, entirely unaware that her word had become far more than a playful nickname. Carter and Alvarez exchanged a glance that conveyed both disbelief and urgency. The commercial flight had not just transmitted a signal. It had unknowingly tapped into a frequency reserved for high-security exercises. For a moment, the seasoned pilots felt the thrill of the unexpected. A child's innocent curiosity had intersected with a disciplined military operation. It was a reminder, stark and vivid, that the sky was shared by countless individuals, each moving through their own worlds, some oblivious to the invisible threads that connected them. As the F-22s adjusted their altitude, the pilots tracked the plane carefully. They needed to ensure there was no threat, but the presence of the word Falcon made them pause. In their world, a single misstep could lead to confusion or even danger. Every signal was scrutinized, every word analyzed. And now, above the hum of ordinary airliners, a child's whispered name had added an element of unpredictability that demanded their full attention. Inside 18A, Emma remained blissfully unaware of the attention she had drawn. Her mind was alive, with the thrill of aerial combat, imagining her Raptor weaving through clouds, evading missiles, and performing impossible maneuvers. She had created an entire story, complete with sidekicks, rival pilots, and dramatic rescues. Every detail was meticulously plotted, angles, speeds, and even the timing of imaginary maneuvers that would earn her the admiration of her fellow pilots in the sky. Meanwhile, the real pilots were beginning to piece together the situation. The word Falcon was not just a coincidence. It was the call sign for a high-level training scenario that was active only for authorized personnel. And yet, here it was, seemingly emanating from a child on a civilian airliner. Carter's fingers moved deftly across the controls, analyzing patterns, cross-referencing the signal, and tracking the plane's trajectory. Alvarez monitored communications, listening for anomalies, while keeping the tension contained. The extraordinary had collided with the mundane, and both pilots knew they were witnessing something rare. Emma's concentration deepened. She was imagining herself in a vast, stormy sky where clouds towered like mountains and lightning illuminated her path. Her Raptor dove and rolled, the wind thrumming against her imagined cockpit, her heart racing with the exhilaration of skill and daring. She whispered Falcon again, almost instinctively, reinforcing her identity within the narrative she had crafted. Little did she know, her imagination had reached ears that were trained to detect, interpret, and respond to such signals with precision and care. The F-22 pilots maintained their distance, observing, calculating, and deciding their next steps. Carter spoke quietly into his headset. "This is unprecedented. It's a civilian aircraft, yet the code matches our Falcon exercise." Alvarez nodded, her eyes scanning the plane below through the heads-up display. They were professionals, and their training demanded caution. But a part of them marveled at the strange beauty of the situation. A child, seated in 18A, unaware of her unintended connection to a top-secret exercise miles above the Earth. In the cabin, Emma's mother finally put her phone down. "Emma, you're going to give yourself a headache if you draw like that non-stop," she said with a teasing smile. Emma didn't notice. Her mind was too alive with maneuvers, scenarios, and heroic feats. She imagined communicating with other pilots via encrypted channels, planning coordinated flights, and executing daring rescues. Her pencil danced across the page, and every sketch seemed more vivid than the last, as though the world around her, the ordinary hum of the airplane, were merely a backdrop to the adventure unfolding in her imagination. Unseen above, Carter and Alvarez monitored every movement of the commercial plane. The strange coincidence of Emma's whispered Falcon had reminded them of the fragility and unpredictability of their profession. In one moment, a child's imagination had bridged the gap between civilian life and military operations, blending innocence with discipline, curiosity with precision. It was a rare intersection of worlds, a moment of extraordinary coincidence that neither the pilots nor the girl could have anticipated. As the flight continued, Emma added final touches to her sketches, imagining a scene where her Raptor performed a perfect landing on an aircraft carrier, greeted by applause and admiration. She felt a thrill of pride, completely unaware that the pilots above were recognizing the brilliance of her imagination in real time, interpreting her words as a potential, though unintentional, key to their operation. The word Falcon hung in the air, a bridge between two realms, the limitless skies of a child's imagination, and the regimented precision of trained military aviators. By the time the plane reached cruising altitude, a subtle tension had formed in the cabin, imperceptible to most passengers. Emma remained blissfully immersed in her world, her sketches now filled with intricate patterns of aerial maneuvers, her Raptor diving and rolling with perfect precision. Outside, the clouds drifted lazily, unaware of the drama unfolding both in the sky, above, and within the cockpit of a child's imagination. The ordinary and extraordinary had collided, setting the stage for a story that would be remembered far beyond the walls of the airplane cabin. And so, Emma in seat 18A, a child lost in sketches and daydreams, became the unwitting focal point of an event that connected imagination, coincidence, and the disciplined vigilance of F-22 pilots high above. Her whispered word Falcon was no longer just a name in her notebook. It had become a signal, a link, and the spark that would ignite an adventure far greater than she could have ever imagined. Emma leaned closer to the window, her pencil hovering above the page as she considered the next move for her imagined Raptor. In her mind, the jet soared above a storm-laden battlefield, weaving through clouds that twisted like smoke from a distant fire. She scribbled furiously, detailing a daring maneuver where her jet executed a barrel roll while evading imaginary enemy missiles. "Falcon, dive," she whispered, tracing the curves of the flight path with her finger. The word felt alive in her mouth, and for reasons she couldn't know, it had traveled far beyond the confines of seat 18A, catching attention in places she had never imagined. High above, Lieutenant Colonel James Carter adjusted his controls with precise, practiced movements. His eyes darted between multiple screens in the cockpit, tracking aircraft in the surrounding airspace. The signal from the commercial flight below continued to puzzle him. It was faint, irregular, yet unmistakable, the repeated call sign, Falcon. He exchanged a glance with Captain Maria Alvarez. "It's impossible," he said under his breath. "Falcon shouldn't be active here, not with a civilian plane in this airspace." Alvarez's eyes narrowed as she studied the patterns. "But it is," she confirmed, "and it's coming from that plane." Carter's instincts, honed over decades of training, told him that the situation required immediate attention. "We're too close to ignore this," he said. "Monitor, but be ready." His voice was calm, professional, but there was an underlying tension that only someone who had spent thousands of hours in the cockpit could convey. In a top-secret training exercise, even a minor anomaly could escalate rapidly, and the appearance of a civilian aircraft transmitting a sensitive code was nothing short of extraordinary. Meanwhile, inside the cabin, Emma's world remained blissfully ordinary, or at least ordinary to her. She had no awareness of F-22s tracking her flight, no comprehension of how the simple words she had whispered could ripple into complex military operations. To her, the sky outside the window was a canvas, and her notebook was the brush. She added loops and rolls to her sketches, imagining the Raptor performing maneuvers no real plane could match. Her call sign, Falcon, was her identity, her mantra, her ticket into the skies she longed to conquer. The F-22s adjusted their positions, maintaining a safe distance while tracking the commercial airliner. Carter and Alvarez communicated in clipped, professional tones over encrypted channels, each word precise and measured. They knew the importance of the signal, understood the stakes, and yet were confronted with a surreal situation. A civilian aircraft transmitting a call sign reserved for a top-level military exercise. Carter's fingers moved rapidly across the controls, cross-referencing radar data, flight paths, and communication logs. Every possibility was considered. Was it a coincidence? A threat? Or something entirely unexpected? Back in 18A, Emma leaned forward again, her eyes wide with excitement as she added a new twist to her story. In her imagination, the Raptor had just evaded a massive storm system, diving and climbing with breathtaking agility. She whispered Falcon once more, completely unaware that the pilots above her were now fully engaged, interpreting the word as a potential signal rather than a child's fantasy. Her notebook was filled with energy and motion, the pages vibrating with the pulse of her imagination. Alvarez studied the radar and visual feeds, her mind racing. "Carter, it's definitely a civilian aircraft," she said, her voice tense. "But the pattern matches the Falcon exercise. I've never seen anything like this." Carter's jaw tightened. "Neither have I. Keep monitoring. Let's not make assumptions yet, but stay alert. We can't afford errors." Their training kicked in fully. Vigilance, assessment, and containment. Above all, they had to ensure that no one was at risk, civilian or military. Inside the cabin, Emma's attention began to shift slightly. She noticed a subtle change in the way flight attendants moved, a quiet tension that hadn't been there before. One of them glanced toward her, their expression unreadable but serious. Emma tilted her head, curious. Something about the atmosphere felt different, though she couldn't quite put her finger on it. The hum of the engines seemed slightly louder, more insistent, almost as if the plane itself were aware of the extraordinary attention directed at it. Carter and Alvarez continued to observe from above, tracking the aircraft with meticulous care. Every movement of the commercial plane was analyzed: altitude, speed, heading. They cross-referenced with all available flight databases to rule out anomalies, threats, or unauthorized maneuvers. Yet the call-sign Falcon persisted, transmitted intermittently, subtle but unmistakable. The coincidence was almost impossible, and yet here it was a child in seat 18A, oblivious to the magnitude of the situation, had unwittingly become the focal point of a top-secret aerial exercise. Emma's mother noticed her daughter's growing intensity and leaned closer. "Emma, are you sure you're okay? You're really focused," she said gently. Emma smiled, not taking her eyes off her sketches. "I'm fine, Mom. I'm just flying my Falcon." "She's going to save the world next," Emma said, her voice full of conviction. Her words were innocent, playful, and entirely unaware of how they mirrored reality in the most unexpected way. Above, Carter's voice came over the headset, calm but precise. "Alvarez, prepare for all contingencies. Keep your eyes open. We don't know what we're dealing with." Alvarez nodded, her gaze locked on the commercial plane below. The F-22s shifted slightly, moving in patterns that allowed them to maintain a safe distance while keeping the civilian aircraft within visual and radar range. It was a delicate balance. Observe without alarming, analyze without interfering, and prepare for any sudden change. Emma, in the meantime, had begun adding imaginary radio communications to her notebook. She scribbled dialogues between Falcon and other pilots, her pencil moving faster than her breath. In her mind, these were coded messages, secret instructions, and daring exchanges between heroes of the sky. Each word, each command, was carefully crafted, reflecting her growing understanding of aviation and strategy. Little did she know, her whispered word had already triggered a real-world version of this imaginative exercise above her. The cabin remained mostly calm, though the flight attendants were now moving with a subtle urgency, guided by instructions received over discrete channels. They maintained professionalism, ensuring passengers remained unaware of the unusual activity in the sky above. Only Emma felt a faint thrill of curiosity, sensing that something was different, though she couldn't pinpoint what. Her imagination fed on the tension, making the world outside her window even more vivid, more alive, more extraordinary than any story she had created before. Carter's eyes flicked to the secondary monitor, displaying communication logs and unidentified signals. "There's definitely something here," he muttered. Alvarez adjusted the visual feed. "I can't explain it. The aircraft is following its planned route, no deviations. And yet, the call sign Falcon keeps appearing." The tension in their cockpit was palpable, but their professionalism remained unwavering. Every detail mattered, every calculation. Could be the difference between clarity and chaos. Emma's pencil scratched across the page, adding more daring maneuvers for her Raptor. In her mind, she was performing a coordinated dance of flight, rolls, dives, climbs, and spins, choreographed with precision. The thrill of control, the excitement of the imaginary mission, and the energy of her own determination coursed through her veins. Every movement of her hand on the paper mirrored the unseen vigilance of the pilots above, bridging imagination and reality in a silent, extraordinary connection. As the flight continued, the strange, almost magical coincidence of Emma's whispered Falcon remained at the center of attention. The F-22 pilots maintained surveillance, cross-referencing every possible scenario. They were trained for unpredictability, yet the presence of a child's innocent curiosity in a civilian plane was something entirely new. For Emma, the world remained a canvas for her imagination, her notebooks alive with action, adventure, and heroism. For Carter and Alvarez, it was a puzzle, a test of skill, and a reminder that even in the disciplined world of military operations, extraordinary coincidences could occur. Finally, Emma leaned back in her seat, satisfied with the next chapter of her imaginary adventure. Her Raptor had executed its daring maneuvers flawlessly, its pilots imaginary, though they were celebrating each victory. She whispered Falcon one last time, a declaration of identity and courage. High above, the F-22 pilots continued to monitor, recognizing the coincidence for what it was. A rare and improbable intersection of worlds, a child's imagination touching the precision of military vigilance. In that moment, two realms collided, linked by a single whispered word. And in that collision, the ordinary flight of Seat 18A transformed into something extraordinary, setting the stage for events neither Emma nor the pilots could have predicted. The sky, the engines, the air itself seemed charged with possibility, a silent acknowledgement that the story unfolding was no longer just fiction. It was a bridge between imagination and reality, innocence and responsibility, curiosity and extraordinary attention. Emma adjusted her notebook in her lap, her pencil poised as if ready to capture the next thrilling moment in her imagined aerial battle. Outside, the sunlight reflected off the windows in brilliant streaks, painting her sketches in a golden glow. She was so immersed in her world that she barely noticed the subtle tension in the cabin. Flight attendants moved a little more briskly, checking on passengers with efficient smiles that didn't quite reach their eyes. Something was different today, something she couldn't yet identify. She shrugged and returned to her Raptor, performing loops over imaginary mountain ranges with expert precision, whispering Falcon with a quiet thrill. Above, Lieutenant Colonel James Carter and Captain Maria Alvarez had intensified their focus. The repeated transmission of the call sign Falcon from a civilian aircraft was no longer a simple anomaly. It was an anomaly that demanded investigation. Carter tapped his headset, bringing up encrypted military channels and alert protocols. "This is serious," he said, voice calm but carrying an edge of concern. "It's a civilian plane, yes, but that call sign shouldn't be anywhere near our exercise. Track it, monitor it. We need confirmation of identity and intent." Alvarez nodded, her eyes scanning the radar as she cross-referenced every flight. In the area, the commercial flight continued along its route, unaware of the scrutiny from above. Emma's father leaned back in his seat, engrossed in his novel, while her mother occasionally glanced at her daughter, noting her unusual concentration, but dismissing it as typical childhood obsession. Emma's world was vibrant, full of imaginary crises and victories, but she was still a child on an ordinary airplane. She had no comprehension of how her whispered Falcon had triggered a cascade of protocols, alerts, and attention from military personnel. Carter's fingers moved with mechanical precision across his controls, logging coordinates and flight data. "It's stable," he muttered, noting that the plane had not deviated from its flight path. "But that doesn't explain the call sign." Alvarez tilted her head, eyes narrowing. Could it be interference or a coincidence? Carter shook his head. Highly unlikely. Falcon isn't just any word. In our operation, it's a code, a signal, and it shouldn't be transmitting from a civilian channel. Inside 18A, Emma paused in her sketching, sensing the faint unease in the cabin. The flight attendants whispered to one another in subdued tones, glancing at her periodically. A small knot of curiosity and apprehension formed in her chest. She had never felt tension like this during her ordinary flights. Something in the way the adults moved, the subtle glances toward her seat, and the occasional radio communication she caught as background noise made her instinctively clutch her notebook a little tighter. But before she could fully process it, she returned to her drawings, letting her imagination fill the gap between what she sensed and what she could see. Carter and Alvarez coordinated silently over encrypted channels. Every action, every observation, every decision had to be deliberate. Identify, confirm, monitor, Carter muttered under his breath, almost as if reciting a mantra. They had trained for anomalies, for unexpected behavior, for emergency scenarios, but nothing quite like this. A civilian aircraft transmitting. A top-secret call sign was unprecedented. The pilots moved in precise patterns, keeping the plane within visual range, maintaining safe altitude and distance, while tracking every communication, every signal, and every variable that could indicate a threat or an extraordinary coincidence. Emma noticed a shadow passing across the cabin as the F-22s subtly shifted above. She didn't see the jets themselves, but a faint feeling of observation tingled at the edges of her awareness. Her imagination intensified the sensation, turning it into a narrative. She pictured her Falcon Raptor being tracked by invisible allies and unseen enemies alike. Her pencil flew across the page, capturing loops, dives, and evasive maneuvers. Her call sign whispered almost automatically. Every sketch seemed to pulse with energy, bridging the ordinary hum of the airplane with the extraordinary vigilance above. The flight attendants, trained in both protocol and discretion, maintained a careful balance. They moved calmly down the aisle, offering drinks and reassurance, while keeping subtle eyes on Emma. One of them leaned slightly toward the cockpit area, receiving instructions through discreet earpieces. They knew something unusual was happening, but had to ensure that the passengers remained unaware. The plane was a bubble of ordinary life, floating above the world, while in the skies above, extraordinary attention was focused on one child's whispered word. Carter's voice cut through the cockpit, calm but precise. "I want a visual confirmation. Nothing aggressive, nothing alarming. Just observation. Keep it contained." Alvarez adjusted her trajectory, maintaining perfect formation with her fellow pilot. The F-22s were sleek predators in the sky, their advanced sensors capturing every detail: altitude, heading, engine signature, and even subtle electromagnetic signals. Yet what they were tracking was not hostile. It was subtle, innocent, and improbable. A child, unaware, whispering a call sign that had become the spark of a high-stakes operation. Inside 18A, Emma's attention wavered as the cabin seemed to hold its breath. The passengers remained largely unaware, but she sensed a quiet tension she couldn't explain. Her heart beat faster, not from fear, but from the thrill of the unknown. She imagined her Raptor performing emergency evasive maneuvers, and in her mind, she executed them flawlessly. "Falcon, ascend," she whispered, drawing a perfect loop on the page. The word felt charged with energy, though she had no idea that it was simultaneously triggering alarms, alerts, and heightened attention far above the clouds. Carter's brow furrowed as he analyzed the data. "We need to rule out interference," he said. "But I don't like the timing. This is too precise, too consistent." Alvarez nodded. "Agreed. We need confirmation. Maintain visual and radar contact. Do not approach too closely. Keep it safe." Their training dictated calm, rational analysis, but a rare mix of astonishment and curiosity underpinned their actions. A child had unknowingly created a bridge between imagination and military precision, innocence and vigilance, a connection that was as fragile as it was extraordinary. Emma's mother finally noticed the intensity in her daughter's eyes. "Emma, honey, are you sure you're feeling okay? You're really focused," she said, her tone laced with concern. Emma glanced up, her eyes bright with excitement. "I'm fine, Mom. Falcon's doing a secret mission, and she's saving the day," she replied, her voice animated. Her words were innocent, playful, and yet, in some strange, almost surreal way, they mirrored the reality of the pilots above, who are now actively tracking and monitoring her flight. As the plane continued, Carter and Alvarez maintained constant communication, coordinating their observations and updates. Every movement, every minor adjustment of the commercial aircraft was noted and analyzed. The pilots relied on instincts forged through years of rigorous training, combining data with intuition to ensure safety without causing alarm. "Stay calm, observe, confirm," Carter reminded himself as they carefully monitored the unusual. Transmission. The child's whisper Falcon was now a focal point, a signal, a subtle but undeniable catalyst for action above the clouds. Emma returned to her notebook, her imagination undeterred. She added detailed radio chatter between Falcon and imaginary wingmen, crafting a story full of strategic maneuvers, precise formations, and daring rescues. Her sketches became increasingly elaborate, the Raptor diving and rolling with impossible precision. Each page captured a world alive with motion and excitement, oblivious to the fact that her whispered words had created a real-world echo in the sky above, an intersection of innocence, curiosity, and military alertness. The flight attendants continued their discreet vigilance, moving efficiently through the cabin, maintaining professionalism while subtly ensuring the situation remained under control. They had learned to detect anomalies, to notice tension, to balance safety and discretion. Yet even they could not have predicted the unusual circumstances unfolding. A child in seat 18A, unaware of her pivotal role in a high-stakes scenario, had become a central figure in a story that was simultaneously imaginary and extraordinarily real. As the hours passed, Emma remained engrossed in her adventure, blissfully unaware of the extraordinary attention she had drawn. Her Raptor executed perfect maneuvers over clouds and mountains, her call sign whispered like a mantra. Above, the F-22 pilots continued to observe, their disciplined eyes capturing every detail, every measurement, every analysis, and every decision. Reflected a world of precision and vigilance, intersecting in an almost magical way with the world of a child's imagination. And in that intersection, the ordinary world of Seat 18A transformed into something extraordinary, charged with possibility and suspense. A single whispered word had bridged two realms, the innocent creativity of a child and the disciplined vigilance of trained military pilots. The flight, which had begun as routine, had become a moment where imagination touched reality, curiosity sparked action, and a single word Falcon set the stage for events that would unfold in ways no one could have predicted. Above the clouds, the sun glinted off the sleek fuselages of the F-22 Raptors, cutting through the sky like silver arrows. Lieutenant Colonel James Carter adjusted the throttle, his eyes scanning multiple instruments simultaneously. Captain Maria. Alvarez sat beside him, her hand poised over the controls, but her attention fixed on the radar and visual feed of the commercial aircraft below. For both pilots, this was no ordinary day. A civilian flight transmitting a top-secret call sign Falcon was unprecedented, almost impossible, and yet it demanded the utmost vigilance. Everything looks normal on their flight path, Alvarez noted, voice steady but tinged with curiosity. No deviations, no unexpected maneuvers, but that call sign. Her words hung in the cockpit like a tensioned wire. Carter nodded, his mind moving through protocols and possibilities. Falcon is reserved for our highest-level operations. It should not be anywhere near civilian airspace. That transmission is either a coincidence extremely unlikely or an anomaly we need to monitor closely. They were professionals, trained for split-second decisions and high-stakes scenarios, yet neither had ever encountered a situation like this. Their training dictated that they stay calm, maintain formation, and observe. Every detail of the commercial flight was being analyzed: altitude, heading, airspeed, engine signatures, and subtle electromagnetic patterns. To anyone outside the cockpit, it might have looked like routine monitoring. But within the cockpit, tension was palpable, a mix of caution, curiosity, and awe at the improbability of the scenario. Carter tapped his headset, initiating encrypted communication with their command center. Falcon transmission anomaly confirmed. Civilian aircraft. Maintaining observation. No interference. No deviation detected. The response came quickly, professional, calm. Protocol dictated that they remain vigilant, avoid any escalation, and ensure both civilian and military safety. Yet even as commands flowed through their radios, Carter and Alvarez were acutely aware of the unusual nature of the situation. Alvarez shifted slightly, adjusting her angle to maintain a visual on the commercial flight. The cockpit was quiet, except for the soft hum of electronics and the steady rhythm of their coordinated breathing. They had flown together for years, sharing countless missions and drills, their trust absolute. In this moment, that trust was crucial. They were encountering the unexpected. A child, seated in 18A, unaware of the extraordinary attention her whisper of Falcon had triggered. Their professional training merged seamlessly with astonishment, a rare combination that made them acutely aware of the delicate balance between observation and intervention. Inside 18A, Emma's imagination surged with energy. Her pencil moved furiously across the page, drawing intricate maneuvers for her Falcon Raptor. In her mind, the jet darted through storm clouds, dodging imaginary missiles, executing loops and dives with flawless precision. Each whisper of Falcon felt like a command, an affirmation, a lifeline connecting her to the adventure she had created. She was completely unaware that these words had reverberated far above, drawing the focused attention of some of the most skilled pilots in the nation. Carter's eyes flicked from the radar to the visual feed. "She's calm," he said quietly, almost to himself. "No erratic movements, no signs of distress. It's a child, possibly unaware of the significance of what she's transmitting." Alvarez nodded. "It's remarkable," she admitted, her tone softening slightly. "She has no idea the implications. And yet, her presence is influencing our operation. The coincidence. It's almost poetic." Carter allowed a faint smile, but quickly returned to professional focus. "Poetic or not, we maintain observation. Safety first. Every moment, every flicker on the screen Every subtle adjustment in the commercial flight's instruments was being logged and analyzed. The pilots worked in harmony, their communication precise yet unspoken in many ways. Years of experience had made them attuned not only to aircraft behavior, but to the faintest anomalies, the tiniest signals that might indicate risk. And yet, here, the anomaly was innocent, a child's fascination and imagination manifesting as something measurable and traceable in the real world. Back in the cabin, Emma noticed something unusual. The flight attendants seemed quieter than usual, moving with deliberate precision. She leaned back, feeling a twinge of curiosity mixed with the thrill of her adventure. "Falcon climb?" she whispered, sketching a soaring loop across her page. She imagined herself rising above the clouds, outpacing invisible pursuers, and executing the perfect maneuver. Her words, though playful and innocent, had already set in motion a chain of events that would not be apparent for hours, days, or even years. Carter and Alvarez maintained formation above the civilian plane, tracking every movement with meticulous care. The F-22s were equipped with the most advanced sensors, yet the data they collected was almost surreal. A perfect civilian flight, ordinary passengers, and yet a signal that bore extraordinary significance. Every calculation, every observation, was logged and cross-referenced. They were performing their duties with precision, but a subtle undercurrent of wonder ran through both pilots. The convergence of a child's imagination and top-level military operations was almost impossible to quantify, yet they were witnessing it unfold. "Her focus is impressive," Alvarez said quietly, almost conversationally. Carter glanced at her, raising an eyebrow. "She's a child," he reminded her. "Focus is one thing, but influencing events above this airspace? That's unprecedented." They shared a brief, silent acknowledgement of the strangeness of the moment. A child, sitting peacefully in a commercial airliner, had become the axis of attention in a high-level military exercise. It was a delicate balance. Respect the civilian flight, maintain safety, and interpret a signal that was, by all rights, not meant to exist. Inside 18A, Emma's notebook was a whirlwind of activity. She had drawn multiple jets, each with its own call sign, all responding to her Falcon in coordinated maneuvers. She whispered commands, sketched scenarios of daring rescues, and imagined communicating with other pilots over invisible radios. Her imagination was boundless, fueled by the hum of the engines, the golden sunlight streaming through the window, and the thrill of creating a world entirely her own. Carter and Alvarez continued to monitor the civilian plane with careful diligence. "Let's keep a safe distance," Carter said. "No approach, no interference, just observation. This is a learning opportunity, but also a responsibility. One wrong move." He left the thought unfinished, both aware of the stakes. Alvarez adjusted the flight path slightly, ensuring a visual line of sight while avoiding any hint of intimidation. Above all, they were guardians, watching silently as the extraordinary unfolded below. The commercial passengers remained largely unaware of the extraordinary attention they were attracting. Most were engrossed in movies, music, or quiet conversation. Only Emma's mother noticed the subtle tension in the cabin, noting the quiet professionalism of the flight attendants, and the occasional glances toward the cockpit. "It's strange," she thought, "but Emma seems happy, focused." She didn't know that her daughter's playful whisper of Falcon had triggered a sequence of events that connected imagination, innocence, and military vigilance in ways she could never comprehend. Carter's eyes flicked back to the radar. "It's stable," he observed. "No deviations, no signals of danger. But the coincidence remains remarkable." Alvarez nodded, her gaze fixed on the commercial plane. "We need to maintain observation until the call sign disappears or we receive confirmation from command. Until then, everything is protocol. Their focus was absolute, a seamless blend of discipline and wonder as they continued to track the plane. Emma, oblivious to the silent scrutiny above, returned to her story with renewed energy. Her Raptor swooped through imaginary storms, executed daring maneuvers, and coordinated with unseen allies in her notebook. She whispered, "Falcon," with determination, commanding her imaginary fleet with precision and bravery. Every line on her page reflected her growing understanding of strategy, coordination, and responsibility, even if she didn't yet realize it extended beyond her imagination. The F-22 pilots continued to analyze every parameter: airspeed, altitude, heading, and electromagnetic signatures. They maintained formation and observation, ensuring that the civilian flight remained unharmed while also respecting the extraordinary coincidence unfolding. Every detail mattered, every second counted, and yet they remained calm, professional, and vigilant. They were witnesses to a rare intersection of imagination and reality, a child's innocence brushing against the disciplined precision of trained military aviators. And so, high above the clouds, Carter and Alvarez watched as the ordinary flight of Seat 18A became extraordinary. A whispered word, Falcon, had transformed a routine journey into a moment of improbable connection. A child's imagination had bridged worlds, touching the disciplined vigilance of elite pilots, and in doing so, had created a scenario that was at once playful, astonishing, and profoundly human. Emma sat upright in Seat 18A, her notebook clutched to her chest as she stared at the clouds outside the window. The sunlight danced across the fuselage of the plane, illuminating the pages filled with intricate sketches of jets, maneuvers, and daring rescues. Her imagination had never been so alive. Each whisper of Falcon carried weight in her mind commands to her imaginary Raptor and its fleet, coded messages to unseen allies, strategies to outmaneuver enemies in an invisible sky. She didn't know it yet, but her playful voice had already captured the attention of seasoned F-22 pilots far above, creating a bridge between innocence and extraordinary responsibility. The cabin hummed with the ordinary rhythm of a commercial flight. Passengers were absorbed in books, tablets, or quiet conversation. Yet subtle cues hinted at a hidden tension. Flight attendants moved with practiced efficiency, exchanging discreet glances. The captain occasionally appeared in the cabin doorway, checking the aisles with professional precision. Emma sensed something. She couldn't identify it, but rather than fear, she felt a thrill of curiosity. Her heart beat faster, syncing with the rhythm of the engines and the energy of the story unfolding in her notebook. High above, Lieutenant Colonel James Carter and Captain Maria Alvarez continued their surveillance, maintaining formation while analyzing every metric of the commercial aircraft. The repeated transmission of the call sign, Falcon, remained their primary focus. "It's remarkable," Alvarez said quietly, "how precise this is. No deviation, no erratic behavior. But the word, it keeps showing up over and over." Carter adjusted the throttle, scanning multiple instruments. "We have to assume it's unintentional, but the coincidence is too significant to ignore. Keep visual, keep radar, maintain safe distance." Their professionalism was absolute, but beneath it lay a rare sense of awe at the improbable scenario unfolding below them. Inside 18A, Emma was drawing with renewed intensity. Her Falcon Raptor now led a squadron through a simulated storm, communicating with wingmen in her imaginary code. "Falcon to Wing 1. Ascend now, evade the storm," she whispered, tracing the paths of her jets with precision. Each command carried conviction, each maneuver executed with the confidence of someone who had spent years mastering the imaginary skies. Her voice, calm and deliberate, carried authority far beyond her years, a fact the F-22 pilots recognized in its own way, even if they could not yet see the source. A flight attendant leaned slightly toward the cockpit door, receiving subtle instructions through an earpiece. She glanced at Emma with a mixture of concern and recognition. Something about the child's intense focus and repeated utterance of Falcon had triggered internal protocols. They needed to ensure passenger safety, maintain calm, and subtly gather information. Emma noticed the glance and smiled faintly, mistaking it for a shared excitement about aviation. Falcon's going to save the day, she whispered again, her voice carrying an unshakable confidence that seemed to ripple through the cabin. Carter's eyes flicked to the radar display. No changes in speed, altitude, or heading, he murmured. Everything is stable. Yet, the call sign remains consistent. It's not interference. It's intentional, even if she's unaware. Alvarez nodded, adjusting her position slightly to maintain visual contact without encroaching on the commercial flight space. This is unprecedented, she said softly. It's like she's communicating with us, in her own way. Innocent, untrained, yet precise. In seat 18A, Emma's focus shifted to strategy. She imagined her Falcon Raptor encountering an obstacle. A sudden storm in the sky, lightning illuminating dark clouds, and her fleet caught in the chaos. Her pencil moved furiously as she drew alternate flight paths, evasive maneuvers, and contingency plans. Falcon, ascend. No, turn left. Watch the clouds, she whispered, her voice urgent but confident. Her mind worked with a clarity and creativity that mirrored real tactical planning, though her audience was entirely imaginary, or so she thought. High above, Carter and Alvarez were noting patterns, subtle anomalies, and the timing of her verbal commands. Each utterance of Falcon corresponded with the data being transmitted from the aircraft below. The coincidence was extraordinary, but the pilot's experience allowed them to interpret it as an opportunity rather than a threat. They adjusted their surveillance tactics, capturing precise coordinates, frequencies, and communications patterns, while ensuring the civilian plane remained safe. Emma, in her innocence, had become the unexpected centerpiece of a controlled, yet extraordinary operation. Back in the cabin, Emma's parents exchanged curious glances. She's really into it, her mother said, adjusting her daughter's seatbelt. I don't think I've ever seen her so focused. Her father nodded. It's more than just drawing. She's thinking about strategy, communication. It's remarkable for her age. Emma smiled, oblivious to their observation, fully absorbed in her story. Her Falcon Raptor executed a daring loop, rescued wingmen from invisible adversaries, and soared through imaginary lightning storms, her confidence unwavering. Carter spoke quietly into his headset, maintaining contact with command. We're observing a civilian aircraft transmitting a code that matches our Falcon exercise. All parameters normal. No interference or deviation. Awaiting further instructions, but maintain vigilance. Alvarez monitored the radar, noting every nuance of the flight. She's calm, intelligent, precise. Unaware of the impact of her words, yet influencing our operation in ways that are extraordinary. Carter allowed a faint, incredulous smile. A child, a whisper, and our attention. Incredible. Inside 18A, Emma paused briefly, noticing the unusual calm among the cabin crew and her parents' intense observation. She tilted her head, curiosity piqued, but instead of anxiety, a sense of purpose surged through her. Falcon to squadron, she whispered. Prepare for the next mission. Her words carried the authority of someone who understood responsibility, coordination, and courage, even if it was all in her imagination. The energy radiating from her small frame was palpable, a quiet heroism that no one aboard the plane fully understood. High above, Carter and Alvarez continued their disciplined observation. They documented every aspect of the flight, maintaining safe distance and ensured the commercial plane's stability. Yet they couldn't ignore the human element, the child's apparent instinct, intelligence, and calm in the midst of extraordinary coincidence. Her whispered words, Falcon, were no longer just a sound. They were data points, markers, and perhaps a subtle bridge between imagination and reality. The pilots maintained professionalism, but even they were inspired by the courage inherent in her presence. Emma's pencil moved rapidly, her sketches growing more intricate, more detailed, and more daring. She imagined her Falcon Raptor performing perfect maneuvers to avoid dangerous obstacles, coordinating with other jets in flawless harmony, and communicating strategic commands that would ensure the success of her mission. Each page captured the brilliance of her imagination, her determination, and a growing sense of heroism. Unknowingly, she had become more than just a passenger. She had become a silent, unexpected hero in a story unfolding both in her notebook and above the clouds. The flight attendants continued their discreet monitoring, balancing passenger comfort with subtle vigilance. They noted Emma's intensity, her calm confidence, and her repeated whispers of Falcon. Instructions flowed quietly through earpieces, ensuring protocols were followed without alarming the passengers. The ordinary flight had become extraordinary, yet all outward appearances suggested routine travel. The child in 18A was central to a complex scenario that bridged imagination, coincidence, and vigilance in ways that no one could have predicted. Carter and Alvarez maintained their silent observation, noting every nuance. "She's doing more than whispering a name," Alvarez commented softly. "She's thinking, strategizing, coordinating, even if it's imaginary." Carter nodded. "It's remarkable. Innocence with insight. And it's influencing us, subtly. We need to maintain observation, ensure safety, but respect her role in this unexpected situation." Their voices were calm, professional, yet tinged with awe at the improbable intersection of worlds. Emma leaned back in her seat, satisfied with the next chapter of her imaginary adventure. Her Raptor had rescued imaginary wingmen, executed flawless maneuvers, and outsmarted unseen adversaries. She whispered Falcon one final time, as if cementing her identity in both the imagined and real worlds. High above, Carter and Alvarez documented everything, recognizing that the child's combination of courage, intelligence, and creativity had turned a routine flight into something remarkable. Her innocence had become a quiet, unexpected heroism. And so, in seat 18A, Emma the child with a notebook and a boundless imagination had become the center of a rare and extraordinary sequence of events. Her whispered words, calm focus, and strategic mind had captured the attention of seasoned F-22 pilots, bridging worlds of imagination and reality, innocence and responsibility, curiosity and extraordinary action. In the quiet of her seat, she was unaware that her role as a hero had already begun, subtle, silent, and profoundly impactful. Emma leaned back in her seat, her sketchbook open across her lap, pages filled with daring maneuvers, imaginary enemies, and heroic rescues. The sunlight streaming through the window illuminated her sketches, each line pulsing with energy and motion. Her mind was alive with adventure, the thrill of command, and the unshakable confidence of her Raptor's call sign Falcon. Yet even as she focused on her imaginary missions, a subtle awareness had begun to seep into her consciousness. The cabin felt different. The flight attendants moved with unusual precision. Her parents observed her more closely than ever, and the low hum of the engines seemed charged with anticipation. Something about this flight was extraordinary, though she could not yet articulate why. High above, Lieutenant Colonel James Carter and Captain Maria Alvarez continued their vigilant surveillance. The commercial plane below remained stable, each passenger engrossed in their own world, oblivious to the extraordinary attention directed toward them. The repeated transmission of the call sign, Falcon, had been logged, analyzed, and documented. The pilots exchanged quiet words over their headsets, reflecting both on procedure and on the improbable human element at play. "She's a child," Alvarez said softly, her eyes fixed on the plane below. But her focus, her clarity, it's almost like she knows she's in command. Carter adjusted the flight path slightly to maintain a better angle of observation. "We've trained for every anomaly," he said quietly. "But this is new. Innocence intersecting with procedure. It's not something you can simulate." The words hung in the cockpit, heavy with respect for the unintentional heroism unfolding beneath them. Both pilots understood that the child in 18A, unaware of their observation, had become a bridge between worlds, imagination and reality, innocence and professional vigilance, curiosity and responsibility. Inside the cabin, Emma's attention wavered for the first time. She noticed the subtle changes, the way the flight attendants exchanged glances, the soft murmur of conversation in hushed tones, and the occasional glance from her parents that seemed more intense than usual. Curiosity sparked in her mind, blending seamlessly with the narrative she had created in her notebook. "Falcon, what's happening?" she whispered softly, her voice carrying a mixture of excitement and uncertainty. Her words were instinctive, yet the timing coincided with the heightened alert above, adding another layer of coincidence to the extraordinary situation. Carter and Alvarez monitored the transmission closely, documenting every moment. The repeated call sign, now clearly originating from the child's utterances, had been captured and stored as part of the operational record. "It's deliberate." "In its own way," Alvarez observed. "She's not aware of the consequences, but she's consistent, focused, strategic." Carter nodded, eyes scanning the data. "Sometimes the unexpected teaches us more than training ever could." A child, her imagination, her courage, this is teaching us about human instinct and presence. Back in 18A, Emma's mind raced with possibilities. She had imagined hundreds of scenarios for her Falcon Raptor, but something about this flight made her feel that her story was more than fiction. Her sketches became more deliberate, her maneuvers more precise. She whispered commands, imagining a real squadron responding to her leadership. Each stroke of her pencil carried authority, creativity, and insight far beyond her years. Little did she know that above her, seasoned pilots were interpreting her every word, every gesture, and every command as data, guidance, and insight into human ingenuity and focus. The cabin crew maintained their discreet vigilance, balancing ordinary service with heightened alertness. Subtle communication flowed through earpieces, allowing them to coordinate without alarming the passengers. The ordinary flight had transformed into a controlled observation, where a child's innocent curiosity had become the focal point of an extraordinary scenario. Emma's intensity and calmness served as a stabilizing force in the cabin, her energy both inspiring and subtly reassuring to those around her. Carter reflected on the unexpected lesson unfolding in real time. "In our profession, we focus on control, procedure, and precision," he said. "But observation teaches humility. A child, unaware, has shown clarity, focus, and courage. Sometimes the unexpected provides insight that no training scenario can." Alvarez glanced at him, eyes thoughtful. "It's a reminder that human instinct, creativity, and courage are as vital as any instrument, radar, or protocol. Even innocence can reveal strengths we take for granted." Emma's mother noticed a rare calm and focus in her daughter. "You're really in your element, aren't you?" she asked, gently brushing a strand of hair from Emma's face. Emma looked up, her eyes sparkling with excitement. "Yes, Mom. Falcon's mission is so important. I have to make the right decisions, or the squadron won't succeed." Her words, though referring to her imaginary world, carried a profound sense of responsibility. In a way she could not yet comprehend, Emma had already begun practicing leadership, courage, and decision-making qualities the pilots above recognized and admired from their distance. The F-22s adjusted formation slightly, maintaining a safe distance while ensuring uninterrupted observation. Every detail of the commercial flight was logged: speed, heading, altitude, and electromagnetic patterns. Yet above all, Carter and Alvarez were observing the human element, the calm, decisive presence of a child leading her imaginary squadron with remarkable focus. It was a rare lesson in perspective, a reminder that leadership and courage can appear in the most unexpected forms. Emma's sketches grew more elaborate. She drew detailed flight formations, escape maneuvers, and strategic rescues, each accompanied by whispered commands of Falcon. She had imagined herself in countless battles before, but now she felt a responsibility she had never experienced. Her imagination had become an exercise in precision, problem-solving, and quick thinking. Unknowingly, her actions had provided a living demonstration of focus, courage, and leadership, an invisible lesson reaching far beyond the confines of her notebook. Carter adjusted his headset and spoke quietly to command. "Observation complete. Flight remains stable. No interference detected. Subject's behavior is calm, focused, and consistent. Notable human factors in play. Recommend continued monitoring for educational analysis." Alvarez nodded, reflecting on the deeper implications. It's rare. A child's instinct, decision-making, and imagination intersecting with our operational protocols. A lesson in human potential, even in untrained individuals. Inside the cabin, Emma sensed a subtle shift. The flight attendants' movements were less tense, more fluid, and her parents' glances were now laced with admiration rather than concern. The realization dawned in her mind. Something about this flight was extraordinary, and she was at the center of it. Her Raptor maneuvers grew more confident, her commands more precise, as if responding not just to imaginary threats, but to an unseen audience. She whispered Falcon once more, feeling a surge of empowerment and clarity. Carter and Alvarez observed in quiet awe, recognizing the child's impact without direct intervention. They noted the consistency, intelligence, and calmness in her behavior. "She's teaching us as much as we are observing," Alvarez said softly. Carter allowed himself a faint smile. Indeed, sometimes the smallest actions reveal the greatest lessons. Focus, courage, and creativity, untrained yet instinctual. A reminder that leadership isn't always formalized. It can emerge anywhere, even in Seat 18A. Emma's mother watched her daughter with pride, finally recognizing the depth of her focus and the intensity of her imagination. "You've really outdone yourself," she whispered. Emma smiled, cheeks flushed with excitement. "Falcon has to be perfect, Mom. Every maneuver, every rescue, it has to succeed." Her words, innocent yet filled with responsibility, encapsulated the essence of what the pilots above had been witnessing: clarity, courage, and instinct manifesting in unexpected ways. The flight continued, ordinary to the casual observer, but extraordinary in the subtle lessons being imparted and observed. Emma, unaware of the full scope, had become a symbol of courage, focus, and creative leadership. Her whispered Falcon connected her imagination with the disciplined vigilance above, illustrating how human potential can emerge in the most improbable circumstances. By the time the plane reached cruising altitude, the lesson had crystallized. Emma, a child in Seat 18A, had inadvertently demonstrated leadership, focus, and courage. Carter and Alvarez had witnessed it firsthand, documenting a rare human factor scenario where innocence, creativity, and instinct intersected with professional military vigilance. The experience would remain with them, an unforgettable lesson on the unexpected sources of heroism. And so, in that quiet cabin, with engines humming and sunlight spilling across her sketches, Emma learned a subtle truth without realizing it. Courage and focus, even in imagination, have the power to influence the world in ways far beyond expectation. Her whispered words, Falcon, had bridged imagination and reality, creating a silent legacy of insight and inspiration that would resonate far beyond the confines of Seat 18A. The plane descended through the fluffy cloud cover, its engines a steady, comforting hum. Emma sat in Seat 18A, her notebook now filled with dozens of pages of her Falcon adventures. The sketches told stories of daring maneuvers, successful rescues, and unbroken courage. She traced her fingers over the pencil marks, feeling a quiet sense of pride. Each line represented not just a story, but a sense of command, focus, and imagination, the qualities that had somehow, unknowingly, sent ripples far beyond her seat. Her parents exchanged smiles across the aisle, their curiosity mingled with admiration. "You've been amazing, Emma," her mother said softly. "Look at all you've created." Emma looked up, her eyes sparkling with the thrill of storytelling. "Falcon always wins, Mom. She has to. Otherwise, the squadron can't survive." There was an innocent conviction in her words, a belief in her role as a leader, even if it was all imagined. But the story above the one unfolding silently in the sky was no longer purely imagination. High above, Lieutenant Colonel James Carter and Captain Maria Alvarez followed the plane's approach from a safe distance. The Raptor jets had shadowed the commercial flight for hours, maintaining vigilance without interference. Now, as the plane prepared to land, they reflected on the extraordinary series of events they had witnessed. A child in Seat 18A had unknowingly transmitted a top-secret call sign, capturing the attention of highly trained pilots and creating a rare human factor scenario that would be studied for years. "Unbelievable," Alvarez said quietly, her eyes following the descent. "We've trained for every anomaly, every contingency, and yet this was something entirely unexpected." Carter nodded. "Yes, and the lesson isn't just about procedure. It's about human instinct, focus, and courage." She demonstrated leadership in the purest sense, without realizing it. Their voices carried a mix of awe and professional respect. The operation had been extraordinary, but the human element, the quiet heroism of an unassuming child, was what truly left them amazed. Back in 18A, Emma's attention returned to her notebook. She imagined her Falcon landing on an airfield, surrounded by cheering wingmen. "Mission complete," she whispered, tracing the words with her pencil. She felt a wave of accomplishment, pride swelling in her chest. Her adventure had reached its climax in her imagination, but the real adventure, the one involving the F-22 pilots, had silently mirrored her creativity. Every command, every whispered Falcon, had connected her imaginary world to the disciplined reality above. The cabin crew moved efficiently, preparing the plane for landing while maintaining calm and discretion. Flight attendants exchanged subtle nods, acknowledging the child in 18A without revealing the unusual attention she had drawn. Emma noticed the calm professionalism, but remained engrossed in her own mission, blissfully unaware of the magnitude of her unintended influence. To the passengers around her, she was just a child lost in imagination, but to the world above, she had been the catalyst for a rare and extraordinary sequence of events. Carter and Alvarez maintained observation until the wheels touched down, ensuring the flight remained stable and safe. The descent was routine, but their thoughts lingered on the improbable nature of the scenario. "A child," Carter said softly, a whisper. And we were part of it. Alvarez smiled, a mixture of awe and reflection. It's a reminder. Leadership isn't always formal. Courage isn't always obvious. Sometimes it comes from the most unexpected places. They followed the plane to a safe distance on the tarmac, maintaining vigilance until all passengers disembarked, their professional duties blending with a profound sense of respect for the invisible hero below. As the plane taxied to the gate, Emma packed her notebook with care. She glanced around the cabin, noticing the ordinary lives of the passengers, the conversations, the laughter, the quiet reading. Everything seemed normal, but for her, it was extraordinary. Every page in her notebook represented strategy, courage, and focus. And even though she couldn't see it, the pilots above had witnessed her precision, her creativity, and her calm. Under the invisible pressures of an extraordinary coincidence. Her mother gently tugged at her sleeve. "Time to put your notebook away, sweetie," she said with a smile. Emma obeyed reluctantly, placing the pages carefully in her backpack. But inside her, the story continued to unfold. Her Falcon Raptor. And her squadron existed not just on paper, but in her mind, ready for the next adventure. The sense of responsibility and courage she had experienced, even unknowingly, was now a permanent part of her. Outside the plane, Carter and Alvarez returned to base. The debriefing would be extraordinary, but it was not the data, radar readings, or procedures that fascinated them the most. It was the human element. They had observed focus, clarity, and courage in an untrained, unexpected source. Emma's actions, though innocent and imaginative, had provided lessons in vigilance, instinct, and leadership that textbooks and simulations could never replicate. The legacy of a child's whispered Falcon had been etched into their memories. Operational awareness. Meanwhile, Emma and her family collected their belongings and stepped off the plane into the bustling terminal. The sunlight hit their faces, and the ordinary hum of travelers surrounded them. To everyone else, it was just another flight, just another day. But for Emma, something had shifted. The adventure she had imagined in seat 18A had left a tangible mark not just on her, but on the pilots above, the flight attendants who had subtly coordinated around her, and the invisible chain of events that had rippled outward. "Emma," her father said, holding her hand as they walked through the terminal, "you were amazing today. I don't think we realized how serious your story or your focus was." Emma looked up at him, a mix of pride and curiosity in her eyes. "I had to make sure Falcon completed her mission," she said simply. Her words were innocent, but the weight of their meaning had been demonstrated in ways even she couldn't yet fully understand. Back in the skies, Carter and Alvarez reviewed their logs and recordings. They had documented the call sign transmissions, the flight path, and the precise timing of each whisper. The mission, though unplanned, had been successful. The commercial flight was unharmed, the passengers oblivious to the extraordinary attention they had received, and the lesson about human potential, courage, and creativity had been profound. "A child can be a hero," Alvarez said softly. "Sometimes the smallest actions carry the greatest weight." Carter nodded, silently agreeing. The legacy of Falcon, the call sign, the courage, the quiet leadership would linger long in their minds and training protocols. Emma and her family exited the airport, stepping into the afternoon sun. The adventure of seat 18A had concluded, but its lessons had already taken root. She carried her notebook, her imagination, and a new understanding of focus, courage, and responsibility. She didn't yet realize the full impact of her actions, the pilots above, the observation logs, the meticulous attention, but the experience had subtly shaped her. Falcon was no longer just a character in her notebook. She was part of a story that had extended beyond imagination, leaving a silent legacy of inspiration. In the weeks and months that followed, Emma continued to draw, strategize, and lead her imaginary Raptor squadron. But now, her confidence had a new layer. A quiet knowledge that focus, courage, and creativity could make a difference in ways no one might immediately see. Her whispered Falcon had bridged worlds' imagination and reality, innocence and vigilance, and in doing so, had created a moment of extraordinary connection that would resonate far beyond her own experience. Carter and Alvarez occasionally revisited the logs, reflecting on the improbable coincidence that had brought a child's imagination into their operational awareness. The event would be shared in guide briefings as a rare case study, a lesson in human factors, intuition, and unexpected heroism. In the end, Alvarez said thoughtfully, it wasn't the equipment, the sensors, or the protocols that were extraordinary. It was her courage, her focus, her imagination. Carter smiled, leaning back. Falcon, indeed. The unexpected hero. And so, the story of Seat 18A concluded not with a dramatic confrontation or a sudden revelation, but with a quiet, enduring truth. Heroism can take many forms. Courage can appear in the most unlikely places, and a single whispered word, Falcon, could connect worlds in ways both visible and invisible. Emma had unknowingly left her mark on the skies, on trained military pilots, and on the invisible tapestry of extraordinary coincidences that sometimes shape reality. As she walked with her family into the sunlight, her notebook safely tucked, in her backpack, Emma whispered one final command, Falcon, mission complete. And in that moment, the child in Seat 18A, the Raptor in her imagination, and the F-22 pilots above all, shared a silent, invisible acknowledgement of courage, focus, and the extraordinary potential that lies within even the smallest actions. The legacy of Falcon was now complete, a story of imagination, innocence, and unexpected heroism that would linger long after the engines had fallen silent.